Today is day 317 of the October 7th war and the Hamas hostage crisis. The latest round of hostage negotiations are well underway. And while there are reports of progress, some key points must be made clear to all actors involved. Hamas is under pressure to release the hostages. But, per media reporting, there is no answer yet from Hamas themselves. Hamas began this war on October 7th, and Hamas does not want to end this war. Israel and its allies must apply all possible leverage to make Hamas do something it fundamentally does not want to do. And this is why maximum pressure must be applied to Hamas from all sides. Hamas wants to again smuggle weapons from Egypt under the Philadelphia corridor. Israel is trying to block it from rearming. Hamas wants to again put its terrorist army back in northern Gaza, right next door to Israeli towns and cities. Israel is trying to protect their borders. Hamas wants to again rape and murder innocents in Israel as they have promised to do. Israel is trying to keep its people safe from Hamas atrocities. There are tangible security threats to the future of Israel from Hamas's demands, and the hostages must be let go now. But giving in to Hamas's desperate ploy for survival doesn't end with peace. Giving in to Hamas guarantees they attempt an October 7th massacre again and again, just as they have repeatedly and explicitly promised to do. There is no possibility of sustainable peace if Hamas survives to retake control of the Gaza Strip. Allowing that simply lays the groundwork for the next October 7th. 115 hostages must be freed from Hamas today, and Hamas must not have the ability to take more hostages again tomorrow. So let's just remember the 3 Ds needed to end the war: destroy Hamas, demilitarize Gaza, and de-radicalize Palestinian society. Israel needs a deal that gets the hostages home and stops Hamas from regrouping. And, as I said before, plotting to do October 7th again and again. So please, audience listening to me here today, tell your leaders to pressure Hamas's backers, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran, and tell them to let them go now. Now, meanwhile, UK Foreign Minister David Lammy and French Foreign Minister Stéphane Séjourné met with Israel's government in Jerusalem and with the Palestinian Fatah government in Ramallah. Now, like on Lammy's previous visit with the Israeli government, the foreign ministers wore yellow hostage ribbons, as I have here. With the Palestinian Fatah government, on the other hand, they decided to remove their ribbons. Now, I will say directly to Ministers Lammy and Séjourné, who I speak to now, Israel knows that our hostages need to be freed. It's actually the Fatah government that needs to hear release our hostages. These are the same moderate Fatah government officials whose then Prime Minister Shatia said in December, Hamas is an integral part of the Palestinian mosaic. These are the same moderate Fatah government whose Secretary General Jibril Rajoub, also head of the Palestinian Olympic Committee, said just 2 weeks ago that Hamas head Yahya Sinwar was a pragmatic patriot and a realistic man, and in November justified Hamas's October 7th massacre. These are the same moderate Fatah government officials whose President Mahmoud Abbas led a prayer for Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh just this week. These foreign ministers must remember that same Palestinian Fatah government says it wants 2 states, while at the same time chanting from the river to the sea. That just means that they want a state from the river to 9 miles away from the sea, so that they can later sprint the remaining distance. The foreign ministers must oppose support for Hamas and October 7th, even when it comes out of the mouths of Fatah governments that Europe pays millions of dollars and euros to. Because coddling Fatah's support for violence enables Hamas violence. And that's not all. Palestinian Fatah President Abbas said just this week that America is the plague. I'm quoting those words that came directly from the mouth of this supposed moderate. Hamas also hates America and the West as a whole. And certainly Hamas's Iranian backers have also been very clear, explicitly so, that America is the great Satan. So everyone around the West, all of Israel's allies across the Western world, must recognize this war isn't simply about the Jewish state. The murderers trying to destroy Israel also seek to expand their vision of destruction across the Western world. And if Israel loses, I want to make this explicitly clear, the Western world loses as well. The West must continue to stand with Israel against terror in order to keep us all safe. So I'll say now for one last time, if you can please like and subscribe what we're doing here, it really helps to make the difference. And at this point, I'll take some questions from our audience watching live on social media, so please continue to submit questions.
Our first question comes from Ella. Do you believe that Hezbollah when they say that they'll stop striking Israel as part of the hostage negotiations?
Ella, this is a very important question, but one we must be very clear on the stakes and understanding what we've seen here. Hezbollah joined the war with Hamas on October 8th when they began striking Israel in solidarity with their patrons and militant compatriots there in the Gaza Strip in the form of Hamas. They began then and have since launched somewhere around 7,000 missiles, drones, and rockets at Israel in the 10 months since that day. Hezbollah is very much a part of this war. They have been at war with Israel, and while many in the world would say that they are taking a constrained approach and being more moderate, I really don't see how 7,000 missiles, drones, and rockets can in any way be ascribed as moderate. Now, whether we can take Hezbollah at their word when they say that they will commit to a ceasefire, well, personally, I don't like to take the words of a militant organization such as Hezbollah or their leader Hassan Nasrallah, who's proven himself in no way to be a good faith actor for any certain means. I will not take that word as any reliable truth or source into the future. That being said, there are indications, whether it come from their patron, common patron in Iran, the Iranian regime, the theocratic regime in Iran, or what we're seeing from Hezbollah themselves or Hamas, there is indications that they may seek to wind down actions, but really we cannot know. Israel is at extreme alertness and readiness and continues to be so for the foreseeable future in case anything further in terms of escalation should come from Hezbollah. But as we have seen, they continue to fire rockets. They continue to fire rockets at towns and villages along the border of Israel. And they have left over 60,000 Israelis displaced from their homes for the last 10 months. These people must be allowed to return home. They must be able to do so safely and be able to sleep in their beds at night, freed from the risk of the likes of an October 7th massacre happening again and again, as so many have promised to do, as Hamas has promised to do, and Hezbollah seems to have joined tacitly alongside with their ongoing attacks in the months since. Really, frankly, we can't trust Hezbollah as a good faith actor, so Israel must make sure that they are ready with the leverage, control, and power and strength of the entire IDF and the entire Israeli people behind them to prevent any such atrocities happening in the future.
Our next question comes from Instagram Live. Is it possible that the hostages are being kept in Egypt?
This is a constant fear and concern of all those, whether it be hostage negotiators, the Israeli people themselves, the IDF and others. Frankly, it is unknowable. As it stands right now, Israel and the IDF are largely in control of the Philadelphia corridor and do control many elements of that border between Gaza and Egypt. That being said, we don't know what happened in the first few months of the war when Israel didn't have control of that area. We don't know whether people could have been smuggled. We do know, in terms of facts on the ground, that much was smuggled in the past from Egypt into the Gaza Strip via that border, and it's where many of the resources that Hamas has now committed against Israel in the months since the start of the war, and indeed on October 7th itself, where many of those elements originated from. That being said, frankly, we don't know. We live in general fear and anxiety of what could happen and what could have happened in the months since to the hostages. The Red Cross hasn't been allowed to visit them or confirm the condition of any of the hostages since the start of the war. The IDF themselves, obviously, while they've conducted amazing rescue operations to bring back a small number of hostages, others have been returned. We still have 115 hostages as far unaccounted for, still being held by Hamas or their affiliates in one way or another. We frankly don't know, and this is why we must get to a meaningful ceasefire that brings the hostages home now so that we can understand the full scope of what the situation is, to get the sort of closure that the Israeli people need in the wake of the horrors of October 7th, and to remove past this unbearable status quo that we find ourselves in. And we can only hope and pray that the current round of ceasefire negotiations yields some sort of result on that front to bring the hostages home now.
Our next question comes from Sharon. Why does Israel help to treat wounded Palestinians? The world hates us anyway, so why are we helping them?
Sharon, it's important, in the case of this war, in the wake of the atrocities that we saw on October 7th, that we never lose our inherent humanity. And that's what we have here in Israel. We have an inherent sense of humanity for all civilians, for all those who are in need, for all those that need help, no matter where they come from and no matter who they are. And that is a key pillar of Israel's resolve and its goals as a liberal democracy fighting in the Middle East for those values against tyrannical, theocratic, authoritarian regimes that would seek to diminish and undermine that. We will not lose our humanity, and if that means helping to treat civilians in Gaza, if that means helping Israelis, if that means helping anyone who we can provide clear support to, while at the same time removing the threats of Hamas and other militant groups like that would seek harm upon Israel, the Israeli people, and frankly, upon their own people in Gaza, then that is what Israel will do. This is why Israel, through COGAT, continues to provide extensive humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip with record numbers of trucks entering through into the Gaza Strip at all times. And as we've seen, so much of that aid being backed up at the border, unable to be distributed by the likes of UNRWA or others who claim to be helping out the Gazan people while simultaneously propping up Hamas through the use of their infrastructure and the use of their facilities in an unregulated and unchecked manner. Israel and the IDF and the organizations here are accountable to a democratic process, which means protecting the lives of civilians wherever possible, adhering to the rules of war, and attempting to seek some sort of justice in a highly unjust, cruel, and unforgiving war that was started by Hamas on October 7th. Let us not forget where that happened and why. And the most just solution we can reach at this point, 10 months into this heinous war started by Hamas, the best solution we can find is a ceasefire operation that would allow the people of Gaza, the civilians and innocents of Gaza, like the people of Israel, to return to some semblance of normalcy, some semblance of peace, but only on the condition that our hostages are brought back home to us, returned as is just, as is fair, and as should be done. And this is a key part of all elements of the Israeli strategy when they look out for people, as I said, Israelis, Gazans, whoever may they be.
Our next question comes from Ed Bar on YouTube. The first two Ds of destroying Hamas and demilitarizing Hamas seem tangible, but how can we de-radicalize a society that has hatred so entrenched in their culture?
Another absolutely critical question, and this must come and start from the bases of education. This must start from the basis of accountability. This must start by rooting out. I would say that the three Ds are interrelated because as we destroy and demilitarize Hamas, we hope that their radical agenda and ideology can be stripped out of Palestinian society, root and stem, in the same way that they themselves will be stripped root and stem from the power and authority of the governance. You imagine, for 17 years now, Hamas has been in control of the Gaza Strip, applying their agenda effectively without restraint or control. Certainly UNRWA themselves haven't been providing any real mechanism of restraint or control, nor have we seen from any other UN organizations. It's been allowed to proliferate these ideas of incitement and hatred against Israel and the Israeli people and against the West as a whole. This sort of radicalization needs to be removed root and stem, and that can happen in a number of ways. So Hamas itself, as I said, being removed. We could turn to Europe and European powers. They're hoping to fund so much of UNRWA and humanitarian aid that goes into the Gaza Strip and ensure that there are checks and mechanisms in place, the textbooks, education curriculum, whatever it might be throughout Palestinian society are not being infected with the sort of incitement and hateful rhetoric that is so dominating Gazan education and Gazan institutions for the time being. These actions and checks can be put in place by those who are sending money in to make sure that their funds are being used appropriately so that you, viewers from around the world, can ensure that your tax dollars are not being spent radicalizing and putting those checks in place. And that's where you can come in, viewers. Please, go reach out to your political leaders, reach out to those relevant parties and say, fine, we can continue providing humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. As I said earlier, it is important that civilians be protected and that sufficient aid be given, on the condition and on the proviso that it does not lead to radicalization, that civilian infrastructure and resources do not get repurposed for military use by militants and terrorist armies seeking the destruction of Israel or others in the West. These are the sort of mechanisms we can all fight for in a fair and just world, which is exactly what we want here in Israel and exactly what the world should want and what all actors involved in this situation should be pushing for to de-radicalize the people of Gaza, to de-radicalize the Palestinians as a whole, and to try and reach some sort of sense of normalcy so we can all live in this region in some semblance of shared nature into the future.
Our next question comes from Instagram Live. Is the ceasefire really a solution? And if it is, what guarantee do we have that we won't see another October 7th?
Well, that's exactly what I spoke to you about today in starting this briefing. The ceasefire is not about a solution to end all solutions. It is a solution for the time being on the proviso we are able to get our people back, to get our hostages returned back to us, those 115 poor souls who are stuck inside Gaza against their will, being held by this terrorist army of Hamas. It is so critical that we reach a ceasefire in order to bring these people home, but it cannot be done under any cost. It must be done in a way that prevents the likelihood of an October 7th happening again and again, as Hamas has so often promised that they would do if given the power and leverage to do so. Israel has worked incredibly hard over the last 10 months to tear Hamas out of Gaza root and stem and to try and remove them and their radical militant agenda from the people of Gaza and separate that out. But that job must be completed. We must achieve those goals. We must destroy Hamas. We must demilitarize the Gaza Strip. We must de-radicalize the Palestinian people, and that must be part of the longer-term goal. But we need to understand what we're dealing with here. In the short term, we need to bring the hostages home, and then we must achieve these longer-term goals over time. And I'm not here to speak about the specificities of how a ceasefire would be achieved. I will leave that up to the politicians and negotiators there at the ceasefire table. But what I will say is that Israelis need to be able to sleep safely in their beds at night. Those 60,000 Israelis that have been displaced from the north must be able to return to their homes. Those 115 hostages must also be returned to their homes. And Israelis must be able to go on with some sense of normalcy and try and put an end to these heinous acts that were started by Hamas on October 7th, and not to fear that those may happen again at any point in the near future. Those are the key goals of a ceasefire. Those are the key goals of any sort of deal moving forward into the longer term. And again, we only hope that the ceasefire negotiations can achieve some sense of that going into the future.
Our last question today comes from Michelle. Canada is compromised, Australia is fully anti-Semitic, America is hamstrung. What can we do as a Western Jew? We feel trapped, and American Jews are really in trouble.
Michelle, I'd like to put a spin of optimism onto this, because I don't think the situation may be quite as dire as you say. I do believe that the allies of Israel in the Western world truly do remain that way. We saw that back on April 13th when Iran launched over 300 drones and missiles towards Israel, and we saw the allies of Israel stand up. We saw the US, the UK, France, Germany, even Jordan and Saudi Arabia standing up in order to protect and defend Israel against this barrage of assault from the Iranian regime. I do not think that in any sense the Western world is lost to the Israeli people. They remain close and dear allies. There are those wayward souls within the West who would try and co-opt certain elements of the media narrative, who would try and make believe that Israel is some global pariah, but this simply isn't the case. And where it may be the case in certain communities, it is our responsibility as supporters of Israel, be you Jewish, non-Jewish, anything in between, to go out at the grassroots level, to speak to your local politicians, to speak to officials around the world, and say that we need to stand up for Israel, that now is the time to be fighting for a Western, liberal, democratic nation, fighting against authoritarianism, fighting against tyrannical, theocratic regimes around this entire region. This is the time to stand up for Israel and help fight for that. And if we can bring enough voices to the table for those that truly do understand and bring our allies along with us, then I think Israel is understood around the world. And this is the message we want to bring forward. Israel will be understood around the world to be fighting for senses of liberal democracy and freedom around the world, and to get our hostages home, to get our people returned to sleeping safely in their beds at night. And all these messages are something that are resonating and being understood. We'll continue to see that, whether it be at the political level, whether it be at the personal level. And this is really the takeaway that I want everyone to bring from this briefing today, that there are allies out there. Israel is not isolated and alone, but we simply need to rally behind the cause to fight for clear and distinct ideas such as those I presented here today, and to make sure that the message comes clear that Israel is a freedom-loving, democratic nation and will continue to fight for those principles into the future, and we must bring all our allies with us. All right, that is all we have time for today's briefing. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen here today. And as I always say, please like and subscribe. It really helps to get the message out and is really so critically important to help spread so much of the message about Israel, the reality that's going on here on the ground at the moment. In the meantime, I just want to say I've been Westropp-Evans. Thank you so much for watching.